What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fans? This your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast networking channel. Want to give a shout out to the rest of the crew: Shy, Kelvin, Jermaine, KB Film Room, Big Dog Talk Sports. That's right, that's right. And for everyone who's tuning in, we hope that you support Behind the Bench, become a subscriber, and help make this show the best that it can be. And with your support, we have now amassed over 2,300 subscribers to date, and we thank you. We really do, and we definitely appreciate your support and participation in this channel. Now, this is 2024, right? We're watching this year's NBA playoffs take place, and we just saw the Los Angeles Lakers succumb to defeat in 5 games versus the Denver Nuggets with another improbable big-time clutch money killer shot by none other than Jamal Murray to seal the deal and to eliminate the Los Angeles Lakers from the playoffs. And yesterday we received, I'm going to call it a warning, an APB, an SOS alert by none other than Magic Johnson, who was the former team president of the Los Angeles Lakers. And what's crazy is I don't believe the Lakers, since Magic has stepped down, there's no one truly presiding over the team in that capacity. Now, we know Rob Pelinka operates as the GM, and we know Jeanie Buss is the owner of the team, right? But they really don't have a team president. Well, it's quite telling because of the fact that a player was brought to this team who took over the entire franchise. So therefore, in essence, we really don't have a team president. But nonetheless, Magic Johnson said, quote unquote, Laker Nation. It didn't start, his quote didn't start off good either. His statement didn't start off good. He put the antlers up right out the gate. Laker Nation, we have a problem. See, everything seemed all peachy keen when they won that so-called bubble championship, right? He said, Laker Nation, we have a problem. All the good teams in the West are young and talented. The Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Thunder, and the Mavs. And the biggest elephant in the room is the Spurs, who with Victor Wembanyama will definitely be a playoff team next season. For the Lakers to compete with all these teams, the roster must improve. Now, isn't that what we was told during the offseason? When the Lakers signed all these young players, from Jackson Hayes from the New Orleans Pelicans, Taurean Prince from the Minnesota Timberwolves, Cam Reddish from the Portland Trail Blazers, Gabe Vincent from the Miami Heat, then eventually Christian Wood from the Dallas Mavericks. They re-signed Austin Reeves, who's a good player. I like Austin Reeves. He was brought in through the scouting department as an undrafted player. They re-signed D'Angelo Russell. They re-signed Gabe Vincent. Not Gabe Vincent, but Jared Vanderbilt for 4 years. 4 years, $48 million, by the way. And then they re-signed Rui Hachimura, I believe, to a 3-year deal. So the common thought was, oh man, the Lakers, they have a young core to move forward with. It sounded good. So if that's really true, that these players they sign represent the young core of the future of the franchise, why is Magic Johnson saying we must improve and that the West is full of young and talented teams? And it's simple. And this is what I've been alluding to, where everything is coming full circle. See, that bubble championship has created a very confusing train of thought because it gave the impression that the original young core of the Lakers were expendable. Yeah, everything seemed peachy keen and everything seemed grand, and that we was gonna run the table. But in all actuality, what it really symbolized was the franchise mortgaged itself off to pursue a win-now scenario with LeBron James on the team, who they signed as a 34-year-old to a 4-year deal. So you're already operating backwards the moment you brought him to the team, right? And therefore, by operating backwards, you was led to mortgage your franchise off. So now, just 4 years ago, after that bubble, everybody was popping champagne, pouring, the bubbly, you know what I'm saying, pulling out the cigars or whatnot. Everything seemed good. Because if you look at it, see, you can't go by what you see. You got to go by what you can't see. And then when you go by what you can't see, then you can see the situation for what it is and what's eventually going to happen down the road. See, in this situation, this is an all-time trade-off. You can't see things for face value, because if not, you're going to get confused. So the impression was given when all this started, bringing LeBron James to this team and bordering off all that young talent to bring in superstars. Because the original plan was, in year one, they was trying to build a super team then. So they figured, the only team that could really challenge them was Golden State. But after Kevin Durant was pushed out the door and forced to go elsewhere, particularly the Eastern Conference, man, they thought, they was going to have a free ride. They was going to have a free road and rack off about 3 straight championships. But when you really pull back the layers of it, the plan never worked. It never worked. They couldn't get that third superstar in year one because the plan was LeBron James, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. Paul George wanted none of it. He re-signed with OKC. He locked into an extension with OKC. And there was no way the San Antonio Spurs were going to trade Kawhi Leonard to their arch rival of the past 40 years since the 1980s. They weren't going to do that. They traded Kawhi Leonard to the Eastern Conference in Toronto, right? So the young core was tolerated in year one of this so-called era. I call it a dubious era of Laker basketball. And it's not even an era, to tell you the truth. It's not even a true era of Laker basketball. So the young core was tolerated, and then plan B was, here come Anthony Davis. We're going to knock on Anthony Davis' door. And he was led to request a trade. And then during the offseason of 2019, after they traded for Anthony Davis, they tried to recruit Kawhi Leonard to finally create the super team. But he decided to go to the Clippers. See, the plan really never worked. So even with Anthony Davis, the franchise was operating in panic. So they had to resort to signing a lot of veteran players to fill out the roster, bringing in Danny Green and Avery Bradley, who had been dealing with a lot of injuries per se. They brought in Dwight Howard, who was not the first option at center. It was DeMarcus Cousins, who they signed that all season, but he injured his ACL and missed a year. So they brought in Dwight Howard, who was really a plan B, and that was a last minute decision. Because remember, they signed Dwight Howard to a non-guaranteed contract. See, I remember all this stuff. And then they brought in, they had Rajon Rondo, who they brought in LeBron's first year. But Rajon Rondo, in the first year, he suffered, I think, like some kind of a hand injury, a broken hand, and he missed the second half of that, the 2019 season. So they had relied on bringing in all these older players, right? And then they threw all their chips in the middle of the table to produce this one season of success, right? So it appeared that the Lakers was back on top of the world when they won that bubble, and that the West was vulnerable as the Eastern Conference grew stronger. So common thought was, oh man, Lakers got it. They're going to run the table. No, that's not what happened. What really happened after that bubble was that season that they so-called won, many teams were beginning to develop their young talent for the future, right? And fans of this franchise didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming. But this is why you have to observe. This is why you have to understand the future landscape of the league and what's about to go down. So there was this false confidence or reassurance that the Lakers did the right thing by letting their young core go. But it was really all fugazi. It was all masquerade. And this is why Magic Johnson said in his statement, Laker Nation, we have a problem. All the good teams in the West are young and talented. He didn't say all the good teams are veteran laden. He said all the good teams that are rising up and surging at the same time, they're all young and talented. Now, I remember after that bubble that I used to see these memes. I used to see these statements, videos saying, oh man, screw that young talent. Screw them draft picks. We ain't seeing that no more. See, things about to get real in the NBA. And with this new CBA collective bargaining agreement, teams are not going to be able to exploit the salary cap in the system like they once did. When you bring a type of player to the team who specializes in manipulating the system and flipping over young players, devaluing them in the process to bring in superstars, that ain't finna work no more. We saw two examples of that this year alone. The Phoenix Suns, who did a similar type of approach by getting ready, by trading away young cornerstone players like Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, letting Cameron Payne go and stuff like that, trading away DeAndre Ayton. That's bad business. You bring in veterans, and you really did it for nothing because you go to the playoffs and you get swept by a young, talented team in the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Los Angeles Lakers, same thing. They just lost in the first round to the defending champion Denver Nuggets in 5 games when Denver wasn't even really playing their best basketball. It still beat them in 5 games. So now, the way this thing is looking, the young teams then took over. You got a defending champion who's prime, who continued building up their young talent. Nikola Jokic drafted in the 2nd round. Jamal Murray, they brought in, I believe, 2 years later from the University of Kentucky. Then they, I think about another year or two later, they brought in Michael Porter Jr. from the University of Missouri. And he had an outstanding series versus the Lakers, probably his best series so far of his career in the postseason. And then they added the necessary components, support around the core players, and they won a championship, and they're still drafting in talent that fits their system of play. And therefore, they have an excellent chance of repeating as champions of the NBA because they didn't shortchange themselves. They didn't sell themselves short. They didn't take no shortcuts. That's why the Lakers are in trouble. When they had that young core, they didn't realize that they was ahead of the curve and that they could have achieved a revolutionary act of building a championship team with predominantly 85% of the roster consisting of mainly one-and-done players, as well as college players, your secondary college players with multiple years of experience at that level being brought into the NBA. And see, and that's why I've been so upset about this whole thing. See, and I'm a Laker fan to the core, and I'm not trying to upset other Laker fans who may come across this video and embrace that bubble chip. Because that's what that was. That was a bubble chip. Since then, since LeBron James been on his team, they have won nothing under a conventional 82-game regular season that consists of a playoff where you have to uh, uh, win and advance at home and on the road. That bubble did not consist of any of those challenges. So what I'm trying to say is we gave up the young core essentially for nothing. And now the NBA is so strong, the Western Conference is so strong. This is the first time ever, I believe, if not NBA history, but definitely in the Western Conference, where 10 teams finished with a record of 500 and above. That's how deep this conference is. The Houston Rockets improved this year by winning 40 games, so they finished close to 500. Utah Jazz, they are accumulating assets out the yazoo, and when they start they rebuild, they're going to be prominent. The San Antonio Spurs, as Magic Johnson said, has Victor Wembanyama, and you know they're going to improve in the future. Then Portland work out they kinks to be competitive. You have the New Orleans Pelicans. Yes, they lost in the first round of OKC, but mainly the injuries to Brandon Ingram, like with 20 games to go in the season, when they was virtually tied for fourth place with the Clippers. He missed 11 to 12 games, and then Zion goes out in the play-in game after scoring 40 points. But they improved from last year, 42 wins to 49 wins. So the Western Conference is about to get so real that whoever's taking shortcuts, they're done. And they're going to fall in the back of the pack. And this is why Magic Johnson say, Laker Nation, we have a problem. This is what happens when you sell off your own. Because the future of the NBA is now, just 5 years later. And the Lakers, since the bubble, have only been able to advance to the playoffs through the play-in. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to get at is the trade-off is something all time. And every year, if this was the right approach, you wouldn't have to be saying the roster must improve. When he say the roster, he ain't just talking about one or two players. He talking about the entire roster. Outside of the player who they gave a franchise to and the player who they mortgaged their future for. And that's why there's only two players remaining from their bubble team, and that's the guy who they gave their franchise to and the other guy who they mortgaged their future for. It's not an accident. So all these ancillary players, they can't hold up because they're not as good as the original young core. The missing link is the original young core. If you stay the course and you elevate that young core and build and develop them, there'll be no need to make this statement. What I'm trying to say is the Los Angeles Lakers didn't need that guy to come to be brought to the team, and they didn't need to mortgage the future off to bring in the other guy because it's not producing results. That's how you know that this was the wrong course of action. This is how you know this is the wrong course of action. This is why fans are holding on to their bubble. But the reality is, if there was no COVID, unfortunately, it was, you cannot predict or you can't really prepare for something like that jeopardizes the lives of people, around the globe. That's why they call it a global pandemic, right? So you can't anticipate nothing like that happening. But if the Lakers would have competed that year in a full 82-game season, it's quite possible that, yes, they would have advanced deep in the playoffs because they threw all their chips. And that's another thing. They threw all their chips in the middle of the season they threw all their chips in the middle of the table for one season. So if they had to play the standard playoff format, they probably reached the conference finals. But there's a good chance that they would have succumbed to the Clippers, who was at their strongest. That was the first year of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, when Kawhi Leonard was still relatively healthy. And I believe they had a deeper roster than even they do right now. You know what I'm saying? And then the Milwaukee Bucks, who going at the league's best record for the second year in a row, where Giannis won the second straight league MVP, I believe Milwaukee Bucks would have claimed the championship that year. That's just me. That's just me. Because the Lakers had the oldest team in the league that year. So think about it. You went so extreme. It's not like you have been building your team up over X amount of years and you was right on the brink of competing for a championship and you made that trade to complete the final piece of the puzzle. No, you went from having the youngest team in basketball to having the oldest team in basketball in the span of a year. So that lets you know the trajectory of the team was going to decline precipitously, which is what happened 2 years later when they went all veteran mode and brought in a team. You form a team that has 5 top 75 all-time players on it. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, and Russell Westbrook. You have 5 top 75 players, and you won 33 games. Lost 49 games, didn't make the play-in. Because they had no young talent. Because they gave up their young core. That was the problem. It's not coaching. The problem ain't coaching. The problem ain't, quote unquote, or the front office ain't making the right moves. The problem is they gave up and sold away and mortgaged off, boarded off, traded off, and undermined their own young core. That's the problem. So when fans say, and I'm gonna round this up, when fans say, well, their young core hasn't done anything, well, it's hard to do something when you take 14 drafted players and you spread them out across the whole NBA landscape on 8 different teams, where most of those teams were already struggling before they got there. Right? So Brandon Ingram went to a team whose franchise player requested to be traded, who the franchise spent 7 years building around. So it was like that franchise was starting all over again. Julius Randle went to a Knicks team that he led to the playoffs for the first time since prime Carmelo Anthony in 2014, 2015. Right? So that don't hold no water. The issue is what they would have done if they'd been allowed to grow together as Lakers. See, that should be the focus. Would they have won the title in 2020? No, they would not have. But the team and the franchise would be better off where you're building towards that naturally, and you will have a longer, sustainable run. And by them serving as the foundation and you keeping your draft picks, you drafting in talent around the clock to where you ain't got to overhaul the roster every year. And you bring in the right star player to anchor that young talent, a star player who has no ulterior motive to flip them over to bring in superstars. Because that formula is done. And actually, it's been done. Only reason it appeared that it was successful because he was doing that in the Eastern Conference when the Eastern Conference was terrible. But in this West, you can't function like that in this conference because there's always going to be a multitude of teams that's going to rise at the same time. And that's what Magic Johnson is alluding to. You got the defending champions who is not going anywhere. Minnesota star players only 22 years old. They're not going anywhere. OKC then catapulted from 40 wins to 57 wins, number 1 seed in the West. See, if the Lakers would have stuck with our young core, we would have been doing that by 2021. Naturally. Now we sitting here at the bottom and we eliminated again in the first round with no real answers. Because this was supposed to be the squad. This was supposed to be the winning formula. You brought in all these young players, but these young players are not good as the young core. Rui Hachimura, he's a solid player. He's not better than Kyle Kuzma. Kyle Kuzma is a more dynamic player, and he's clutch and hits big shots. Taurean Prince or whomever, they're not better than Brandon Ingram. Seriously? You do a pound for pound and compare the players. Christian Wood, he ain't nowhere near. Jackson Hayes, nowhere near Ivica Zubac. Zubac is the number 1 rim protector in the NBA. That means of all the great centers in the league, Jokic, not saying he's a better offensive player, but on defense, that means he's standing on defense more than all the best big men in the league. Who's better than Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench? Nobody. See, when you break it down, pound for pound, individually, you see the enormity of the trade-off. And there's no superstars out there to trade for. Look, you trade for Anthony Davis, and then 2 years later, you trade for another superstar franchise player in Russell Westbrook. That's not even supposed to be happening. Big trades, like major trades, something like that by the same team, that should be like every 5 to 6 years. Well, because of this dude on the team, you making trades like that every 2 years. That's not even feasible. And it didn't even work. So at the end of the day, what Magic Johnson basically is saying is, we made a mistake. That's basically what he's saying. When you read between the lines of that statement right there, Laker Nation, we have a problem. All the good teams in the West are young and talented. The Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Thunder, and the Mavs. And the biggest elephant in the room is the Spurs, Victor Wembanyama. Will definitely be a playoff team next season. Now, will the Spurs be a playoff team next season? You know they'll be better. But basically saying the Spurs are a team to look out for in the future. For the Lakers to compete with all these teams, the roster must improve. They've tried every variation, going all veteran mode. Then after the bubble, they try to bring in pseudo young players, and that didn't work out. Then you went all veteran mode, even to a greater degree than you did during the bubble. And that team folded like a tent with 33 wins, the most disappointing team in franchise history. And then, that malaise carried over to the next year when the team started off on 5 and 2 and 10, and they was about to plummet again. And then they got an influx of young players to compete in the NBA. And that front lasted briefly, but it still don't solve the fundamental flaw and the fundamental problem was going on. And it's because they gave up their young core. See, you can have two superstars, and if the team's not built up right, it's going to fail. So when you trade off, when you was just the youngest team in the world, and then you become the oldest team in the world, well, you're going to collapse at some point. It don't matter what franchise it is. It can be the all-time franchise. It could be a story franchise like the Lakers, but you will collapse. And then you're in the Western Conference. And these teams are surging at the same time. So what I'm trying to say, Laker fans, is this was a mistake. And basically what Magic Johnson, what he's saying is, man, we better get ready for the future is bleak because the future was given up. That's what he's saying. So without him actually saying it, he's saying get ready to be at the bottom for a very long time. And that's the danger of not seeing things long term and using practicality and using logic. See, you in this business, you can't throw all your chips in the middle of the table, especially when you have so much promise and you have the world in the palm of your hand. You was blessed with the deepest young core in basketball, because I still have the articles. I still remember like it was yesterday. People covering the NBA, people covering the Lakers, they all said that their young core was the deepest and best and most versatile in the league, pound for pound. And that was given up. And that's why the team finds themselves struggling year after year after year. And it's not about the coach. It ain't about the front office. It's what they gave up. You can bring in, I'm just saying, hypothetically, you can bring in Pat Riley, you can bring in Chuck Daly, you can bring in Red Auerbach, you can bring in Phil Jackson, you can bring in all them coaches to sit courtside leading this team, and it's still not going to solve the problem. That's what I'm trying to say. When you give up what you need to flourish long term, that's what you give up. The ability to succeed long term. So in the back of your mind, even fans had to realize that this was a trade-off. They just thought that once they got AD and try to get another superstar, that they was going to run the table. But you can't assume that in this business, playing in this conference. So now they on the outside looking in yet again. And these young teams are advancing in the playoffs. Let's look at it. And it's not just young teams, it's small market teams. Denver, Minnesota, small market teams. They advance to the next round. OKC, small market team, advance to the next round, waiting on either Dallas or the Clippers, right? So you'll always have a team from a large market in the playoffs. That's not the issue. It's about these small market teams are wised up and smartened up, and they have figured out a formula to thwart player empowerment driven teams and stacking the deck. They found a formula, and it's now starting to take over. And it's the best thing that's ever happened in the NBA. But what the Lakers don't realize is that they was at the forefront of all of this just 6 years ago. All they had to do was execute. That's all they had to do. The blueprint, the framework was there. All they had to do was execute and let it materialize. And we'd be having a different conversation right now. We wouldn't be saying, well, what has that young core done? No, what we'd be saying is their young core is off the charts wearing their purple and gold. I guarantee it. So, as Magic Johnson say, we have a problem. And what they really need to acknowledge is they made a mistake in letting that young core go. That's really what it comes down to. See, the major voices ain't going to say it. But those out there who know and is real is going to be honest with you. It was a mistake because they're not going to win anything. They could bring, and if they bring this dude back, man, it's going to be the same. We got to trade for this. We got to trade for that. And you're digging a deeper hole going into the future. And it's easy to say, man, we're worried about the future when they get here. Well, the future is now. See, that's the thing. In this business, you got to think practically. It's easy to say, oh man, screw that, man. We want to win now. But the thing is, you in win now mode, but you ain't winning. That lets you know right there. Trouble is lurking. It's not like you cashing in. You're not even making the playoffs outright. You got to go through the play-in under nefarious means. So at the end of the day, what Magic Johnson is saying, we made a mistake. A mistake was made. And that young core, the real Lakers, the real Los Angeles Lakers, was let go and used to try to shortcut the game. And you can't do that. So and I knew this was going to happen at some point down the road. It was coming. You just have to wait to see things play out. But when it hit, it's going to hit hard, baby. And that's what's happening right now. So until next time, this is JB for BTB Behind the Bench.